Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Pick Recap Show, Week 17. I'm John. That's Erik. Erik, the Army went 2-0 this week. Green Bay -5 at the Bears, and the Bills -3 hosting Miami. We agreed with these picks. Let's take a look and see what happened, man.
Yeah, a really successful week all around for both you and I and Pick Army, John. Two solid plays that both, frankly, blew out their opponents. So we were willing to lay points, but we could have laid a heck of a lot more than we did. So two really strong plays, really good insight, 2-0. It feels good and good to get hot heading into the playoffs for sure.
Two absolute blowout games. I mean, look at the Bills-Miami game. The Bills scored 28 pretty much unanswered points. I mean, they got a field goal in there before halftime. They didn't even bring their quarterback back in the second half. I mean, that game was just absolutely bloody. Let's talk about that one first.
Yeah, the Bills, we had said the motivation factor was going to be a big delta here. At least that's what the betting public thought, and we disagreed with that. Our real strong contention was that the Bills had just as much to play for as the Dolphins did, even though it was a win and in sort of playoff game for the Dolphins, where it was just sort of jockeying for position with the Bills. But there's a lot of thinking, and it happened last year when the Ravens, 14-2 or 13-3, I don't remember, but a juggernaut got knocked off at home in the divisional round of the playoffs after getting a week off. A similar fate could befall the Chiefs this year if they're not careful and they don't kind of pick up their play. So the thinking in Buffalo's locker room, at least what we thought, was that the Bills were going to take this game seriously, because if they won it, which they did and did in convincing fashion, not only do they take some good momentum into the playoffs, but they're also the second seed. So if the Chiefs get knocked off divisional weekend, Buffalo is hosting the AFC Championship game. That's got tremendous value, particularly this year with all the COVID protocols going on. So we saw through the noise that spread was too small with a quarterback as inexperienced as Tua is. We'll get to him in a minute. Miami's got a great defense. They've got great pieces to build around. They found their coach. So you have to call this a successful season for the Dolphins, barely missing out on the playoffs this year, last year picking at number 5 overall. So a successful year, but they just weren't quite ready to get over the hump, particularly needing to go through a team as dominant as the Bills.
I think there's some questions there whether or not the Dolphins are going to draft a quarterback. Is Tua the guy here in Miami is the question, I think.
Well, I mean, questions to say the least. I think this opens up a huge can of worms, and you're right. It's been solidified that the Dolphins now, who traded with the Texans, they have the Texans' first overall pick, which is number 3. If the number 2 team end up taking the very talented offensive tackle from Oregon, they take a cornerback from Alabama, some of the top-ranked players outside of quarterback, then at the number 3 pick, you get your choice outside of Trevor Lawrence. You get your pick of any other quarterback on the board. That could be pretty tempting. You know, John, we talked about this in the reveal show, where you had said how good Tua, or how well Tua had played when he was in college, and that was a reason to be backing him now that he's in the NFL. And I disagreed, and the reason is that you're playing behind All-American linemen, you're throwing to All-American wide receivers when you're at a school like Alabama, and oftentimes those things don't translate to the NFL. We had just seen Dwayne Haskins, an Ohio State product, released 2 years into his career after being drafted in the first round. So a lot of these big name program guys have not panned out. And that was the reason I was a little bearish on Tua, particularly in this spot. He was in way over his head. His coaching staff didn't help him. But the bottom line is, if you get behind, if you get into as big a hole as the Dolphins did early in this game, you need to throw the ball to be able to catch up. Tua wasn't up to it, but I also think his coaches put him in a tough spot, and it also saves them all the embarrassment of the fact of the matter is, if the Finns, however they had done it, for example, the Colts losing, so the Finns sneak into the playoffs, they would have had to start Fitzmagic. No ifs, ands, or buts. It would have been done. I mean, so in some ways, they saved themselves that heartache. This team was not going to win the Super Bowl this year. And so the real question becomes, what do you think about quarterbacks that come from these big name programs? While I was prepping for the show, I went ahead and I looked at the starting quarterbacks this wild card weekend. I'll read you the teams, but also the quarterbacks. So these are the starting 12 quarterbacks, the colleges that they went to for wild card weekend, and I think you'll see the trend. North Carolina State, Phillip Rivers at Josh Allen, Wyoming. Jared Goff, Cal Berkeley at Russell Wilson, Wisconsin. Tom Brady, Michigan at Alex Smith, Utah. Lamar Jackson, Louisville at Texas A&M at Ryan Tannehill. North Carolina's Mitch Trubisky, at Purdue's Drew Brees, and Baker Mayfield of Oklahoma at Ben Roethlisberger, Miami of Ohio. If you see in there, you have Wisconsin, Michigan, and Oklahoma. You definitely could say Michigan and Oklahoma are powerhouses. Let's put Wisconsin in there as well, even though Russell Wilson actually started at North Carolina State. So you're talking about 1 in 4, 25% of these quarterbacks went to big name colleges. The other ones went to small ones. And I'll just repeat, I mean, Wyoming, Utah, Purdue, Miami of Ohio. And by the way, those guys that I just read, they're the quarterbacks that are favored in those games. So these are it really, I think, opens up the new question of, when you have that much help around you in college, can scouts believe the tape on these big name quarterbacks the way they would at a smaller school like a North Dakota State, a Wyoming, even, a Temple? Smaller schools where these quarterbacks, they have to fight and prepare every single week to be great. I think this is a game and a situation that's going to be studied for a really long time. If I were to make a bet right now, I think the Dolphins, with this defense and this coaching staff, I do think they pull the trigger and draft a quarterback number 3 overall in April.
I agree. I mean, you've got such a quarterback heavy draft coming up that it would be surprising if they didn't. Or, who knows? Crazy things happen on draft day, trades happen. But I don't think Tua is number 1 under center next year.
John, we spent the majority of this, talking about the negative side of the Dolphins, but I think you make a good point. I mean, what the Bills did yesterday was unbelievable. You have to think that they're now a serious contender to win the whole thing. Miami has the most expensive, the most highly paid secondary in the NFL. And those receivers, I mean, Stephon Diggs is really talented. The rest of the guys, I mean, they're mid-tier receivers. These guys are not elite. And what they are doing to these secondaries is just unbelievable. So a tip of the hat to Sean McDermott and Josh Allen. Those guys are ready to go. It's going to be a very exciting January for Buffalo fans.
All right, well, let's take a look at what happened in Chicago. The Pack looked great yesterday. I would not be wanting to play this team, and now they've locked up the number 1 seed. So if they make it all the way to the NFC Championship game, that means that it goes through Lambeau. What are your thoughts on this game, man?
My thoughts on this game are exactly what we said in the reveal show, that Chicago had gotten hot, but that 30 points per game element was not going to last, that the defense is still really good, but this is not a team that's ready to compete. I think the big question that this game opens up is the NFL announced an additional playoff team this year. And the fact is, I would ask, do we really need the Colts, and do we really need the Bears in the playoffs this year? I mean, the Colts had trouble putting away Jacksonville, quite literally the worst team in the NFL. In fact, the Colts were the only team that Jacksonville beat this year, albeit week 1, so it was a while ago, but nonetheless. And then the Bears, who go to Green Bay, get blown out of the stadium by the Packers. That score should have been bigger. Marquez Valdes-Scantling dropped a walk-in touchdown from Aaron Rodgers in the 3rd quarter. So, I mean, that game could have been even worse than it was, and yet the Bears still make the playoffs. So I think that's the real question that gets brought up by the Bears game, more so than anything is, I know it's more advertising dollars. God knows I'm going to be watching the 2 7-seed games, but did the product get better by introducing these 7 seeds? I would actually argue no. I think there's a chance that I know the Colts are 7-point dogs at the Bills, which I think is pretty slim. The Bears are 9 to 9.5 point dogs at New Orleans. So bookmakers are not considering these games to be really overly competitive. Back to Mitch Trubisky. He had a nice little run there, but this guy, clearly is not going to be able to take you to the next level. So I think really it's more of the same here. I do think that the Packers looked a little bit susceptible on defense. Some of the problems with the running attack that they had earlier in the year and being able to stop opponent rushing games came back a little bit here. So that's a concern going into the playoffs. That being said, you got to like the Packers as the favorite in the NFC. There's a reason they're the number 1 seed, and boy, did they look it on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've been saying it all season, but it's very hard to go against an Aaron Rodgers quarterback team, especially when he's got good coaching. Yeah, I mean, there were some concerns with the game yesterday, but a dominant performance in division on the road set themselves up for a playoff run. So definitely think that this is going to be an outstanding playoffs, as you said. The 2-7 games might be a little bit rough, but that's why we watch. There might be upsets, man. You never know.
Yeah, and to that point, John, the last 2 times that a team has gotten into the playoffs with a losing record, they actually not only covered the spread as fairly heavy underdogs wild card weekend, but they actually outright won the game. Carolina did it, interestingly enough, with Ron Rivera as the head coach. And then Marshawn Lynch went into beast mode for the Seahawks, who upset the Saints at home. Seahawks 9.5-point dogs in that game and outright won. So it does bear watching. You know, they say any given Sunday. So hey, listen, if the Bears and the Washington football team go out there and kick some butt on Saturday and Sunday, I'm gonna have some crow to eat. Although the NFL certainly didn't do the Bears any favors. I don't know if you knew this, but Alvin Kamara was out for the Saints on Sunday due to COVID protocol. Given the protocol that was put in place by the league, if the Saints had a game on Saturday, Kamara would not have been allowed to suit up. But the NFL put the Saints-Bears on Sunday, so Kamara is now in there. So the NFL did New Orleans a solid. I think they're rooting for the Drew Brees walk-off as a champion thing. Brees has made it clear this is his last season. So the NFL, the New Orleans Saints caught a big break there as far as Kamara's availability.
I mean, who wouldn't want to see this guy ride off into the sunset with a championship? I mean, the dude's a class act. He's a gamer. I mean, he's gutty. He broke ribs this year and came back a couple weeks later. I mean, I can't even say enough about Drew Brees, and even I, who's not a Saints fan, I'd love to see this guy, you know, do some damage in the playoffs and go out the right way. So it would be nice to see, and you know, the NFL gave him a little assist to help him do it. So be it.
John, you took the words right out of my mouth. Class act, and that's universal. You know, I remember a couple years ago, one of his offensive linemen was retiring, giving a retirement speech, and literally broke down in tears. This is a 340-pound guy, you know, bawling, talking about how much respect he has for Drew Brees. So I agree with you. The only thing I'll say is, this is where the gambling part gets into it, in that, you know, if that line gets over 10, man, it's going to be pretty tough to steer clear of the Bears, I will say. So that's where sometimes you are rooting against people that you like. But no, I agree with you. I think it would be an unbelievable story for a guy who really deserves it. Tough as nails, a total class act. I totally agree. We are not New Orleans fans, but we would be remiss if we didn't talk about two teams who we are fans of, my being the Philadelphia Eagles, who, thank God, locked up the 6th overall pick by losing and not ruining the New York Giants' chances of getting in to the playoffs. John, as a lifelong Giants fan here the day after, give me your reaction to the Eagles. You know, they gave it a good shot, didn't they?
Yeah, for 3 quarters, and then the 4th quarter, they kind of just said, you know what, we're just going to go ahead and lay down for a little bit. I actually have no issue with what happened last night. I think you as a team, as an organization, you have to play for what you have. If the Giants really wanted to make the playoffs, they would have handled business and put themselves in a better position. With how the season started, though, in the middle of the season, things got very exciting for the Giants, and I am excited for the Giants moving forward. They now look like they're going to be in the 11th spot to pick. I think that's a good spot for them to be in. Sure, it would have been nice for them to have a higher draft pick, but they won the last game of the season. They can't hang their heads down as to what it is. They needed help to get in the postseason. Washington took care of business. However you want to say they took care of business, but they took care of business. And they're just not it. And I think now Joe Judge needs to recoup with his team, get things together, put together a nice war room draft board, and attack the draft the way they need to. Look at some things in free agency. They have their defense. Blake Martinez is a beast. I think that guy's going to be around for a very long time. Saquon will be back next year. A healthy Daniel Jones looks pretty decent under center. I mean, he's an Eli style quarterback. I think you could call him a little bit of a game manager this year, but I don't think we've seen all that he can give just yet. So I'm excited to see what happens with the Giants moving forward. I know 6 wins isn't something too exciting to be too excited about, but I've suffered through some 2 and 3 game win seasons with the Giants for the last couple of years, and to know that we were in it going into the last game of the season, I can't be upset about that.
I think that's really well said and good analysis, John. And the other thing too is on this last day of the season, after week 17, you have to factor in: does a team have momentum, or are they going in the wrong direction? I'd be willing to bet you, and these spreads, they typically come out, or the odds, I should say, typically come out in April or May. I think the Giants are going to be the favorite to win the NFC East before the season next year. If not for the Daniel Jones injury, you are hosting Tom Brady and co. on Saturday night. It was just a bad injury. And even in that, you were able to go into Seattle and get a win. You started off 1-7. It was just too slow of a start. A new head coach, a new staff, a young quarterback, no OTAs, no preseason. And yet you still gave Tampa Bay everything they could handle on a Sunday night game, almost knocked them off. So I got to tell you, as an Eagles fan, we're going into an off season of tumult. We're going into, there are more questions than there are answers in Philadelphia right now. For the New York Giants, you got a lot of good momentum. You found your head coach. You have a serviceable, albeit not great, quarterback. You get your best player back in Saquon Barkley, an offensive line that's improving. Yeah, you need a few pieces here, but that Blake Martinez signing by Dave Gettleman was widely criticized. That guy is an absolute stud. It's an exciting time to be a Giants fan, and particularly because, why was part of the reason that New England was able to have the dynasty that they had is that the AFC East was so bad. I mean, the Bills, Dolphins, and Jets, the Patriots averaged like 5.1 wins every year in division. So that's almost 5 to 6 gimme wins every year that then allow you to have home field, et cetera. If you look, Brady's road playoff record is not that great, but at home, he was almost unbeatable, which translates to trips to the Super Bowl, which translates to championships. The Giants are a solid team, and boy, are they in a bad division. The Eagles and Cowboys, particularly with their quarterback situations, with their cap situations, they're in trouble next year and even beyond. So it's an exciting time to be a Giants fan. I'm born and raised in Philadelphia. My great-grandfather was the general contractor on Veterans Stadium. My ties to the Eagles go way back, and I'm a big fan. But as an objective analyst, I'll tell you, the team that I like the best in the NFC right now heading into this offseason, without a doubt, is the New York Giants. So you have some good times ahead of you. Tough loss or a win, but then obviously tough to get knocked out in that fashion, but some good times ahead for the New York Giants.
Good times indeed. I do have a question for you, man. I was looking at the playoff slate. How does a wild card team get a primetime game on Saturday night? I mean, how does that happen?
Well, I'll tell you, the NFL, they have been jonesing for the biggest name in the sport, Tom Brady, playing the biggest franchise in the sport, the Dallas Cowboys. So you better believe that the NFL was hoping the Cowboys knock off the Giants yesterday, and then the Eagles knock off the Washington football team so they get their wish. That game would have probably broken playoff record ratings, certainly for wild card weekend, but probably would have given conference championships a run for their money. It was pretty much known that if Tampa got into the playoffs, unless there was a matchup between real veteran quarterbacks, that Tampa Tom was going to get the Saturday night primetime slot. He's the biggest draw in the sport. The Chiefs aren't playing, obviously, because they got the bye. So the NFL didn't get the dream matchup that they were hoping for, but you better believe they're going to put Tom Brady and that lantern jaw in primetime Saturday night. So I saw that coming, thought it was coming, and then when I saw the schedule, kind of chuckled to myself because I think the best matchup, not even close. It's not sexy, but the Ravens at the Titans. Ravens obviously avenging the loss from last year. They opened as 4-point favorites, so clearly bookmakers and think they're the better team. So that's the best matchup of the entire weekend, in my opinion, and it's the Sunday 1:00 game. So insiders and analysts like us, we look for something a little bit different. Most folks, they want to see Brady in action. So that's the Saturday night game. Again, we off screen, we talked about that briefly last week. Like, gee, I wonder if Brady's going to be in Saturday primetime. And sure enough, there he is against arguably the worst team to actually make the playoffs. Although, I don't know, what would the spread be between Washington and the Chicago Bears? I think those are probably the two weakest teams. I would say probably Washington, maybe -2. So I'd say the Bears, I don't know. That's a tough one actually between those two. So Brady at the worst team to make the playoffs, and the Washington football team, the worst record anyway. And yet that's the Saturday primetime game, man. Those chiseled features, man, they go a long way when it comes to the showbiz, huh?
They definitely do. But I'm interested to see what Tom does with the Washington defense. I mean, the Washington defense is pretty good, and they did struggle a little bit yesterday, but I think that was because of the mobile quarterback. I mean, you take the mobile quarterback out of that game, and you put in a little bit more of a pocket passer. All of a sudden, the pressure starts coming down. So, I'm interested to see what happens. I mean, Tampa Bay's running game is good, but it's not great. But I did want to talk about a running game that I think is going to make a huge difference in the playoffs, and that's with the Titans. I know the Titans are playing against the Ravens. The Ravens put up, I want to say it was close to 400 yards on the ground yesterday, if not more than that. Unbelievable running approach. But I think Vrabel's going to have his team ready. I'm excited to see what happens. And then the beast of Derrick Henry. I mean, come on, man. That guy needed over 200 yards to get 2,000 yards for the season, and he got it. That's insane against a team and a game that counted. That if they had an inch to the right, you're talking about potentially the Colts winning that division instead of Tennessee. Because they did win by the skin of their teeth. I mean, that ball dinked and dunked all over the place and got into that field goal. So I'm interested to see that matchup. I mean, the running approach for both these teams are dangerous. But I think the coupling of Tannehill and Henry, I mean, that's a good backfield there.
Ryan Tannehill is the most underrated player in the NFL, in my opinion. I mean, his stats this year, when you look at folks that look at this scientifically, whether it's Pro Football Focus or some of the insiders on ESPN or Fox Sports, Tannehill's been unbelievable this year. And I was actually very critical of their signing him. I thought that was a questionable move to give him big money and keep him. And boy, was I wrong. Tennessee caught a big break here. And the reason is that Tennessee not only gets to play a home game, but the knock on them is that they have no pass rush, a complete lack of pass rush, the ability to get to the other team's quarterback, harass them. Deshaun Watson kept that game really close yesterday, and the Texans are the third worst team in the NFL by record. Now, I will say a quick side note. The Texans were doomed from the beginning because of their schedule. It was the most difficult schedule I have ever seen. I think it was something along the lines of at the Chiefs, at the Ravens, then home against the Steelers. They went 0-3, and the season was pretty much over right then and there. So a quick caveat as far as Houston goes. That being said, Tennessee doesn't have a pass rush, but the beauty is they're now playing Lamar Jackson, who is not a stereotypical pocket passer. So that inability to get to the quarterback isn't going to hurt Tennessee as badly in this match as it would have if they had lost and then had to go to Buffalo. If you don't get any pressure on Josh Allen, he's going to sit in the pocket and just carve you up. So Tennessee caught a real break here. We're going to do a matchup show later in the week where we kind of break it down. We each give our picks for all 6 games. I lean Ravens. I need to do a little bit more research here. The spread's about 3.5 to 4. And I do think the Ravens are looking pretty sharp, because I got to tell you, my prediction for the Super Bowl here is Ravens-Packers. I think the Ravens go on a run here. I do think they kind of avenge what happened last year. I think they're getting hot at the right time, and we can get more into that later in the week. But Tennessee caught a real break here as far as that pass rush, which is far and away the worst part of their team, their real Achilles heel. That's not going to beat them up too much in this game. So it should be a really good one. Of all the games this weekend, that's the one I'm looking forward to the most. It's going to be unbelievable. Derrick Henry, the best running back in the NFL, versus Lamar Jackson, the most mobile quarterback in the NFL. It's going to be great.
Erik, anything before we sign off, man?
Make sure to check us out later in the week on Friday, where John and I give our individual picks for all 6 of Wildcard Weekend's games, as well as some good analysis for all of them. If you're planning on betting, it's definitely something you're going to want to tune into. And then Saturday will be our reveal show. What is Pick Army thinking about the games for Wildcard Weekend? So stick with us. Make sure to check those out.
Well, everyone, we'll check you out in a few days. Everybody have a wonderful week, and we'll see you soon.